On October 13th, 2021, Jason Schaefer was going about his day doing his job as a United States postal carrier in Longmont, Colorado. The first half of his day was pretty routine. He drove the mail truck through the residential area, stopping at each box, delivering letters and packages. He had texted his girlfriend throughout the day, and he didn't ever mention that he had noticed anyone following him. At 12:30 p.m., Jason stopped at what's often referred to as a cluster box or a community box. It's one of those large metal boxes that holds the mail for multiple residents. They're common at apartment complexes and can also be seen at the entry to some pre-planned housing developments. He was on Heather Hill Street right off of Renaissance Drive going into a housing development called Somerset Meadows in the southwestern edge of Longmont. He got out and began opening the boxes when a woman approached and Jason handed her mail to her. She was a resident of the development and recognized Jason as their regular mail carrier. As she was walking back to her house, she heard a series of loud pops. Someone had approached Jason while he was working and shot him multiple times before running away.
Yes, hi. I'm at 2005 Sicily Circle. I need an ambulance. Our post office guy was just shot. I heard 4 shots, and he's down. There's a FedEx guy checking on him right now. He is breathing. Please send an ambulance.
Okay, ma'am, I am sending them. I need you to answer the questions that I have. Where is he bleeding from?
He's bleeding out of his mouth.
Okay,
he's bleeding out of his mouth. He was shot. Can you guys tell where he was shot? Can you tell where he was shot?
Did anyone witness this?
I don't know if anybody saw exactly. We saw someone run. We heard 4 shots.
Okay, which way did the person run?
Down Renaissance. So south on Renaissance.
Okay, what was that person wearing?
A hoodie.
Blue mask.
Yeah, I couldn't identify him. I just saw a backside of a man running away after 4 shots, laying out.
The suspect was described as a man wearing dark clothes and a hood with a blue medical mask covering their face. By the time a police officer arrived on the scene, Jason was dead, and investigators would quickly learn that the description of the shooter they had been given was not entirely accurate. This is Monsters. Jason Schaefer was born on July 1st, 1988 in Connecticut to Ernest and Lori Schaefer. After about a year, his parents got divorced and Lori supported him by working for the United States Postal Service. It was there that she began dating a coworker named Chris Hebert, and eventually the two got married. Jason grew up in Deep River, a small community right on the Connecticut River. He was described as a loving kid who was great at sports. After graduating from high school, he followed the family tradition and became a postal carrier in Deep River, but he longed for more adventure, so in 2014 he transferred to Colorado. He started delivering mail in Longmont, about 40 minutes north of downtown Denver. Just like his mother, Jason met someone at work and they started dating. Devan Schreiner was born on August 14, 1995, and one source said she grew up in Florida, but she said in her police interview that she grew up near St. Louis. She had 3 sisters, and it seemed that her parents weren't together. All of the girls lived with their mother until Devan was 16 when she moved out and started living with her father in Colorado. Her younger sister, Rosa Shore, said that from that point, Devan did not have a relationship with her mother or sisters for 9 years. She began working for the Postal Service in Longmont, and there she met Jason near the end of 2014. The couple had only been together for a few months when Devan got pregnant, and people said that they both wanted a family, so they were excited at that prospect. Unfortunately, the relationship was just too new, and they soon realized that they disagreed on some vital issues. Devan wanted to be a stay-at-home mother, but they couldn't afford to live on a single paycheck. It was also revealed that Devan wasn't always faithful, and that tension caused them to break up. According to Devan, Jason left them when their son was 6 months old, but it doesn't sound that simple based on the extensive journals that Jason kept. He seemed like he was someone who wrote in a journal anyway, but he also clearly documented all the interactions he had with Devan after their breakup, which didn't even seem like a solid breakup. They continued to go back and forth between dating and broken up for years. People close to Jason said he tried to make things work with Devan for his son's sake, but that she was constantly cheating on him and wouldn't make compromises regarding the care of their son, which made that impossible. His journals contradict Devan's claims on multiple levels. In an entry dated Monday, August 15th, which was in 2016, he wrote that he had moved out 4 days prior. Based on when they started dating and when she got pregnant, that would mean Jason moved out 16 months after their son was born. In that entry, he's venting about the fact that Devan had another man stay the night that soon after he had moved out. On that same page, he detailed a physical assault committed against him by Devan the following day. Shortly after that altercation, Devan filed for a restraining order claiming that it was Jason who struck her, and Jason was barred from going within 100 yards, which is about 91.5 meters of her, which was already a problem since they shared custody of their son, but they also worked in the same facility. It meant that Jason was only able to work when Devan had a day off. That seemed to be the catalyst of Devan's move north. At some point during their co-parenting struggles, Devan moved to Fort Collins, about 30 miles or 48 kilometers north of Longmont. After she moved, she refused to give Jason her address for a while, despite her being required to since they co-parented. It didn't seem like she had any reason to keep her address from him since he had no history of going to her home and harassing her. It just made co-parenting more difficult. And to be fair, most of the information about Jason and Devan's history comes from Jason's side. His journal, his parents, and even Rosa, who was no fan of her sister. But even if you take the information with a grain of salt, Devan really does seem like she was being as difficult as possible while Jason was trying to make compromises for the benefit of their son. Devan began delivering mail out of the Loveland post office, which is almost dead center between Longmont and Fort Collins. Their son went to daycare or preschool in Longmont, so it seemed like Devan would need to drive down there to drop him off and then go back north to the Loveland post office. Devan claimed that she wanted to make the restraining order permanent, but it was advised that it would make their co-parenting more difficult. Her being granted a restraining order against Jason wouldn't automatically make him lose his visitation with his son. If he couldn't be near her, it would mean there would always need to be a third party to pass their child between them. According to Devan, because of that she decided not to seek a permanent restraining order. It seemed like the couple struggled through their co-parenting for a few years, continuing an on and off relationship. It was at the beginning of 2020 when some more serious relationship drama started. In February of 2020, Jason wrote an entry in his journal that looked like a suicide note to his son. Then he went on to write what sounded directed at Devan about the ways she had hurt him. He wrote about finding out that she was more than friends with someone named Joseph. He also mentioned that she had been with someone named Anthony, who would later be revealed to be a man named Anthony James Ritchie, who went by AJ. In that long entry, he described Joseph as a douchebag. Later that year, Devan kicked Joseph out and went back to dating AJ, who was married and had kids. At the end of 2020, Devan reconnected with her sisters, and Rosa moved in with her at the beginning of the following year. Through most of that year, Jason documented the problems he had communicating with Devan, as well as a few times where she failed to pick their son up from school. In his entries, he wrote about still being in love with her up through June, but then her failure to respond to him seems to push him past his desire to be with her. That was when Rosa entered his life. It seemed that Rosa had met with Joseph about something, and one thing led to another, and they had sex. Rosa told Devan, and she immediately kicked her out of their apartment. She stayed with her other sister for a few days before moving in with Jason. You know, why not make things more complicated? Jason and Rosa had not been together romantically before that point, but Rosa said they basically started dating the day she moved in. She had known him since the beginning of 2021 when she reconnected with Devan, having seen him at child exchanges, and that was about it. Jason's parents said they had told him it wasn't a good idea, but they admitted that they had never seen him happier. Obviously, there will be people with a negative opinion of that choice, but they were both adults and they were both single, so as it may have been an unpopular choice, it didn't make anyone deserve a death sentence. The relationship between Jason and Rosa was what most people believed was the start of Devan's desire to kill Jason. Investigators would later recover text messages between Devan and AJ where they discussed the possibility of killing Jason. By September of 2021, almost all of Jason's texts to Devan received no response. They needed to bring specific supplies to their son's school for him during the COVID time period, and he texted her repeatedly about the list with no response. She finally responded on Facebook Messenger, confirming that she had gotten his texts. The following day, their son arrived at school with none of the supplies. The behavior that Jason was experiencing from Devan caused him to talk to his lawyer about modifying their parenting agreement. He wasn't trying to get full custody of their son, but he wanted to have a little more time with him, and he wanted some consequences written into the agreement for the time she broke the rules of that agreement. It sounds like Jason and Devan had a 50-50 split on their time, but Jason's parents said she broke the rules of the agreement all the time. Things like not abiding by exchange times and locations or providing the child with things he needed. The only thing Jason could do about it was to contact his lawyer and go to mediation, which he had to pay for, and it didn't make her change her behavior. He wanted the parenting agreement to have set consequences written into it. In his journal, he wrote that he wanted to make the custody split 60-40. It turned out that Devan had been served with paperwork regarding the modification of the parenting plan. It's not clear what the paperwork she received said, but based on text messages she had sent, she thought Jason was trying to get full custody. Devan, who was already seething at the thought that Jason was now living happily with her sister, was now facing the thought of having her son less, and she was not about to lose that control. Based on text messages between Devan and AJ, they had talked about killing Jason for some time before Devan had received the paperwork about the parenting agreement, and even before Jason started dating Rosa. I don't think anyone will ever know how her plan came together or what other plans she may have tried before. On September 27, 2021, Devan was caught in an employee area of the Longmont post office, and she was going through Jason's belongings. Jason was out on his delivery route, so his supervisor called and asked him if he had given her permission, which he had not. Devan was then escorted out of the building. It doesn't seem like she suffered any consequences at that time. People first speculated that she might have been trying to plant something incriminating in Jason's belongings, so at Jason's request, his supervisor checked and didn't find anything. Jason's parents suggested that she might have been looking for his keys so she could get into his apartment for a variety of nefarious reasons. Jason and Devan exchanged their sons each week, and the boys stayed with each parent for a week at a time. Jason picked up his son on October 10, 2021, and that was the last entry in his journal, at least out of the documents I got. It read, quote, "Picked son up at Loveland, PO. No masks, no water bottle. Said it's daddy's problem. I asked her what they were missing in son's bag. She just walked away. Son said he didn't know." That was a Sunday, and that started the week that Jason had custody of his son. The next day, Devan got notified that they were going to have to schedule a court date regarding Jason's request for a change to their parenting agreement. Wednesday the 13th, they got up and carried out their schedule as usual. Jason left the apartment at 7:30 a.m. to take his son to school and then head to work. Rosa said that he normally does a chunk of his route in the a.m., then stops by his apartment to hang out with her because she worked in the afternoons. She specified that they had left the apartment that day at 10:52 a.m. He went back to his route and she went to work at a Montessori school in Longmont. They had texted each other back and forth throughout the day, and the last text she received from him was at 11:46 a.m. She texted back at 12:30 but would never receive a response. Multiple people heard the gunshots and a couple people witnessed it. Outside of the resident who called 911, who had been standing nearby, other people called to report the sounds. Longmont police were on the scene within minutes. The first officer on the scene saw Jason lying on the ground between the curb and his mail truck, bleeding from his face and head. Officers on the scene immediately started CPR and continued until the paramedics arrived, but Jason would not survive his wounds. The witness described a man with a hoodie pulled up, wearing a blue medical mask, who had been standing across the street when she went to get her mail. Once Jason was alone, that person walked up to him, fired multiple shots, and then ran away. It was immediately determined that Jason's murder was personal. Nothing had been stolen. Not from Jason or the mail truck. The shooter went straight up to Jason, shot him multiple times, and then ran away. He was clearly the target. The way he was shot also showed the attack was personal. He was shot once in the back, and once he fell to the ground, the shooter walked closer and shot him in the face, with the bullet entering just under his left eye. And then they put the gun right near his head and shot him in the forehead. The shot was close enough that it left stippling on his skin. Stippling is little black dots around the bullet wound where particulates had left the barrel of the gun and hit the person's skin, causing burns. Investigators immediately began canvassing the area, not only looking for witnesses, but also asking for any residents who had doorbell cameras. Investigators collected those videos and logged all of the pedestrians and vehicles that were recorded in the area in the minutes around the crime. At the same time, other investigators were contacting Jason's family to get details about his personal life. It was most likely that someone he knew was involved in his murder. After informing Jason's mother about her son's death, she described the contentious relationship he had been having with Devan. She also told them that the situation had become more complicated because Jason had recently started dating Devan's sister, Rosa. Investigators went to the Montessori school and spoke to Rosa's supervisor, confirming she had been at work during the time of the shooting. Then they informed her that Jason had died. They got some basic details about Devan, which were enough to put her at the top of the suspect list. Once the doorbell camera footage was reviewed, they logged multiple vehicles passing by, one of which is Jason's mail truck. There are some sedans and there are a few pedestrians, but a camera picked up a person running away from the scene with a hood and a blue mask, which is clearly the shooter. A few minutes later, another camera picked them up, continuing to walk away from the direction of the shooting. Not long after that, a black Nissan Rogue can be seen doing a U-turn in a cul-de-sac and then driving out of the neighborhood. The car was seen in the direction the shooter had been headed. It was also noted that the vehicle was missing a front passenger hubcap, giving it an obvious distinction from other similar models. Detectives had looked up Devan's information, and their interest was further piqued when they learned she owned a black Nissan Rogue. They then searched records and found an image that had been captured by a traffic camera of her vehicle, not only showing the missing hubcap, but logging her license plate. It was definitely her car. So how much of a coincidence would it have been for Devan's car to be a few blocks away from where her ex-boyfriend was just murdered? It would be a pretty big coincidence, but it wouldn't be the only one. The order that things happened was that the investigators learned about Devan and the custody issues, then learned it was Jason's week to have the boy, so they went to the school, talked to the staff, and had child services take custody of him. It wasn't until about 5:30 p.m. that police first spoke to Devan. She had actually called the police to find out what was going on because, as she claimed, she had been getting calls and texts about Jason. She was told that her son was at the police station and they asked her to come in for an interview.
Where is my son?
He is at the police department and he is safe with
So he's not here?
This is the police department. He is here.
Okay, well, why is he not here with me? I need him to be here with me. I haven't seen him and I don't know what's happened. He was taken from his school without my knowledge or consent. And I don't know what's happened to his father. So I need to, where is he? He needs to be here.
Can I have the detective talk to you first and he'll explain what's going on?
I don't know why he wasn't here when I got here, but I need my son. I am worried about my son. He is 5 years old. And I don't think any of you have told him anything that's happened. I don't even know what's happened.
First, it seems very much like she caught herself showing that she knew more than she should have. She was worried and she didn't think they had told him what happened. Why would you suggest the police should have told your son what happened? What do you know about what happened? It's a strange thing to say if you have no idea what actually happened to your ex. And then to jump right to a proclamation that you don't know what happened is super suspicious. Now, as a parent, I understand being upset not knowing where your child is, especially a 5-year-old, but law enforcement usually won't release a child to a parent who is the suspect in the murder of the other parent. That's understandable, but she seems most upset that her child was taken from school and she wasn't notified. The detective who interviewed her first tried to claim they didn't have her contact information, but her contact info would have been on file at the school, so that seems like he's feeding her a line of BS. I believe they intentionally kept her in the dark because she was such a strong suspect at the time and they were trying to gather as much information as they could before she found out she was being investigated. They brought Rosa to the police station at the same time they brought Jason's son so they could ask them both questions about Jason and Devan's relationship. As a witness, not a suspect, a child doesn't need parental permission to be interviewed, and though it was unlikely they would get anything useful out of a 5-year-old, they figured it couldn't hurt.
I'm going to tell you some bad news. Your ex-boyfriend, is it? Ex-husband?
I just call him my son's dad.
Son's dead.
We were never married, but...
He died today.
What? How? What happened?
Someone shot him in the face.
In the face? Where?
On his postal route.
He was working today? He doesn't...
Yeah. Yeah, he was working, and someone came up and shot him.
When did this happen?
12:32 today.
It is 6 o'clock.
Her acting is terrible. I'll give the obligatory everyone responds differently statement, but I don't think anyone would react that way to finding out their child's father was shot in the face. Then she seems surprised that he was shot around 12:30 and it's 6 o'clock then. Why? What did she think the timeline should have been? What does she think they were doing during that time? I really wonder what's going through her head at this point in time. She must have known she would be questioned, but I think the fact that her son was brought to the police station is throwing her for a loop. Then the detective told her he needed to read her rights, which I think made her panic a little more. The police will absolutely question someone without reading them their rights. Anyone who is speaking to a detective willingly and is not being held for any reason doesn't need to have their rights read to them. That most commonly describes a witness. A witness is just being questioned because they may have information that will help solve the case, but they aren't considered a suspect. Rosa was in a different interview room at that same time being questioned by a detective, and she never had her rights read to her. That's because she wasn't a suspect. She had a solid alibi and no motive. Though Devan is under the impression that she's just coming in as a witness, the detective is reading her rights first because the authorities are almost 100% positive she was involved. After her rights were read to her, the conversation went right back to whether or not she could see her son.
We didn't want them to release the child to you.
Don't release him to me. But nobody even told me his whereabouts.
Well,
I thought he was with his
The
father.
police escorted him back here, and Rosa was here as well.
Why? She is not his guardian.
No, she's not his guardian.
Okay, then why was she here?
We're not releasing her yet. We want to find
So
out
she's with him? She's with my son?
We're all with. She's being interviewed by a detective because we're not sure who she is.
She's my sister.
The child is here. The child is being interviewed by a forensic interviewer.
He should not be interviewed because I didn't give consent for him to be spoken to.
He's a witness, so he doesn't need consent from the person.
Was he there? Was he in the...
But he's going to tell us about the relationship between you and his father.
But I don't...
You don't understand.
He's 5.
Well, he might not have anything to say.
I feel like her anger isn't entirely because she didn't know what had happened to her son. She was angry because her plan to get rid of Jason and simply walk away with her son was already being disrupted. I feel like she's extra angry because she killed Jason to get him out of the way so she could have her son 100%, but she didn't even get him the same day. She didn't get a single minute of time with her son after the murder. And then she found out they were interviewing her son and then Rosa, which shows they're clearly digging into her life. If Jason's journals, along with other family members, are to be believed, Devan's biggest concern was not her son. It was Devan. She's overly frustrated because her plan is already falling apart. Then she gets hit with more bad news.
I don't pretend to know everything that happened, but there are some things that are really kind of concerning me. We saw your car in the area of the crime scene. Your car was a Nissan Rogue that is missing a front passenger front hubcap. We caught your car on a license plate reader a little while ago with your license plate, and it has that front passenger hubcap missing. Sure enough, in the videos around the crime scene, that car is there with that front passenger bumper or hubcap missing. You said you're at work today, but your scanner goes off before the homicide and turns back on well after the homicide, and they track your scanner that's used at work to your boyfriend's house, AJ. So that's really kind of concerning. And we caught the shooting on one of the Nest doorbell cameras from across the street. So I'm really kind of concerned. I know that you got served just the other day with the child custody order, and you're a little upset about that. So why is your car in the crime scene area? Why are you in that area in your car, and why are you turning off your scanner?
I didn't turn off my scanner.
No, you did.
No, I did
not.
not.
Postal inspectors are here.
Turn off my scanner.
You didn't go with the scanner. The scanner's at your boyfriend's house, or somewhere in that area, in front of it, or in a bush somewhere in that area. It wasn't with you. Okay, they have a breadcrumb trail and GPS on your scanner. Yes. And the postal inspectors are here, and they said before the homicide, you're not doing anything with the scanner. It's stationary for like 3 hours or more, and it should be mobile because you're working, but it's at your boyfriend's house. And why is your car in the crime scene area?
I don't.
We've got video of your car in the crime scene area.
I don't know why it would be on camera that my car was down there, but I don't.
Listen.
If I don't scan packages, then obviously I'm not doing that. But I did stop I did stop at his house for my lunch break, sort of.
After Devan had become a suspect, investigators immediately looked at where she may have been that day. They learned that she had been working according to her supervisors, but when they pulled up the record from her postal scanner, it showed that it had been inactive for a long period of time. This detective repeatedly says she turned it off, but she didn't. It was on the whole time. It just showed that there was no activity on it for about 2 hours. And that inactive time was specifically around the time that Jason had been shot. One more coincidence that Devan would need to explain, which she wouldn't.
Have you been around any guns lately? Have you been shooting anything lately?
No.
So we do a gunshot residue test that's going to come back negative?
It better.
This detective would eventually come in and swab her hands for gunshot residue, and I don't know what the results were. Devan continually denied having any knowledge of why her car was seen in the area of the crime, and I don't think she realizes they're not talking about another black Nissan Rogue. It's her car. They got the license plate number and the matching missing hubcap. It's crazy that there are people today who believe they can drive anywhere and never be caught on camera, but especially in a residential neighborhood. I bet in a neighborhood like where the shooting happened, there isn't a block of road that isn't partially covered by a camera, be it a doorbell camera or a security camera of some sort. To just drive your own vehicle a few blocks away from where you're going to murder someone is just wild. I guess if criminals were smart, I wouldn't have a job. Once Devan realized that she was a suspect based on the location of her car, she asked for a lawyer. So the detective started getting things ready to swab her for gunshot residue and take her clothes when a postal inspector came in and asked if she would speak to him. He made it very clear that he knew she had asked for a lawyer and very clearly got her permission to ask her some questions. Now, I don't think Devan understood what a postal inspector is. A postal inspector is a federal law enforcement agent for the Postal Service. They're like a police detective just for federal postal laws. On top of investigating crimes involved with the mail, they also investigate crimes involving postal property and postal employees. I think many people believe a postal inspector just deals with mail, but if someone murders a postal carrier, sets fire to a post office, or steals a postal truck, the postal inspector will investigate just like a detective or an FBI agent. Near the end of this interview, the inspector talked to her about gunshot residue and blood spatter, and she said, quote, "So you're not just a postal inspector?" At which point he showed her his ID. Referring to just a postal inspector gives the impression that she believed his job was on a lower level than a homicide detective. That being said, once she agreed to talk to him, he was able to get a lot more information from her. The first detective, in my personal opinion, seemed all over the place. He didn't keep the interview in a concise order, and he threw out a lot of irrelevant information. The postal inspector learned that she was kind of a floating carrier who didn't have her own regular route. She did multiple routes covering for specific carriers when they were off. She did Route 14 every Wednesday because that was the day the regular carrier had off. Then he had her go over the timeline of her day. She said she drove to the Loveland post office in her own car, by herself, and she didn't make any stops on the way. She said she got to work at about 8 a.m. and got the mail truck set up for her deliveries. She said the amount of packages was light for the day. She left the post office at 10:30 to start her route. She said that her boyfriend AJ lived on that route, so on Wednesdays she would stop there for lunch. She explained that AJ lived with his ex-wife and their kids, and that the ex-wife was out of the house on Wednesdays, so that was another reason she always went there for lunch on that day. She said she usually gets there at about noon, but since there were less packages for that day, she got there a little early. She went inside, claiming she left the postal scanner and her cell phone in the mail truck. Inside, they ate pizza rolls and eventually got into an argument about their relationship.
We've been trying to make things work for a while, and they're not working, and we have a lot of differing views on things, I guess. Especially with his ex-wife living with him.
Okay. I'd imagine that that's a big source of frustration for you too, and for you specifically. Are they kind of doing it because it's a financial type thing, maybe?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay.
It's one of the problems.
Okay. And then, how long do you think you guys argued?
I don't know. I didn't really look at the time.
Okay. What did you do when you left his house? Did he go with you? Or you were in your postal vehicle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys, what happened after that?
We argued for a while, and then he got angry and left, and I stayed in my truck, and I was very upset, so I was crying, and I was in my truck, and waited for a while until I was able to calm down.
Mm-hmm. What made you so upset this time as opposed to any other time?
Because I'm always upset.
Okay.
It's not any different.
When he left, where did he go?
We don't know.
According to Devan, after arguing with AJ about their relationship, they both left the house and went their separate ways. Devan said she then sat in her mail truck crying for a little while before continuing on her route. It sounds like she was at AJ's house for around 2 hours. When she was done at work, she headed home, and since she didn't have her son that week, was planning to meet a friend to watch television. She said that on her way home, she started getting texts and calls about Jason, and eventually she ended up at the police station. The inspector asked her more questions about her car. Devan explained that she bought her car brand new in 2017 and that she was the only person who drove it or had keys to it. She said the other key was somewhere in her apartment. It's interesting that she was so adamant that she didn't know how her car would be in the area, but didn't leave herself any opening for the possibility that someone else took it. She could have said she didn't know where the other key was. Maybe Rosa had it. Something to add a level of doubt to the idea she had driven to Longmont, but nope, I'm the only person who drives my car and nobody else could possibly drive it. Great, then that leaves you, genius. She also told the inspector that she had delivered newspapers for a while, which often gets done late at night, and she fell asleep at the wheel and hit a curb. It did some damage to the front passenger side of the car, which got fixed, but she had never replaced the hubcap. She basically reconfirmed that it was her car in the area and that she was the only one driving it.
When's the last time you've ever shot a gun before?
Over a year ago.
Okay. And whose gun was that?
It was one of his.
One of AJ's? Okay. How many guns does AJ have?
I don't know.
Okay. Is it more than one? You said guns, so I'm assuming you meant...
Yes, he has a few, but I don't know how many. I don't know how many he has.
Okay. So, what kind of guns are they?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with... I don't know that much about them.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Okay.
I can tell you.
When did you guys last go shoot? You said about a year ago?
For our friendiversary last year, yes.
For your what?
Friendiversary, like an anniversary for friends.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Do you remember what date that was then?
I don't. It was at the beginning of November.
Okay.
So
sometime in November. Where'd you guys go out shooting?
There's a place in Loveland.
Okay, like a gun?
Like a shooting range.
Like a shooting range. So you went there, and you said you had done it a few times before. Had you been with him a couple times before?
No, I had been with an ex before.
With an ex-boyfriend? Okay. Do you have your own weapons? You don't have any guns or anything of your own? Okay.
She's very put out about having to deal with any of this. It seems like there are people who kill a spouse or a partner and don't understand how much that's going to affect them. Like their spouse or an ex can be shot in the face and they're just going to answer a few questions and go home. And it's possible for that to happen when it's very clear that you weren't involved. If you were far away in a room full of people and don't have a motive, it might be at least quicker, but most of the time your life is going to be pretty thoroughly disrupted. If my wife were murdered, even though I had nothing to do with it, I would still have to jump through a lot of hoops with the authorities. I just find it fascinating how many people underestimate what a murder entails and how thorough the investigators will be.
Well, I'd like to know, who do you think would have done this to Jason?
I don't know who would have done this to Jason. I don't know his life anymore. I am no longer a part of it. He made that perfectly clear when he decided to, for lack of better words, sleep with my sister.
And that is the root of all of this. Again, it may be frowned upon to start dating your sister's baby daddy, but for Devan, who was possessive of Jason despite not wanting to be with him, it was impossible for her to see him and her sister have any sort of happy family along with her son. Even Rosa suspected Devan had killed Jason because of his relationship with her.
And I don't know why, I was just like, I feel like Devan's gonna be mad and she's gonna try to do something. If I'm being honest, that's what I thought. Can you tell me more about what maybe made you think that? Because she's a horrible person.
Since AJ had come up repeatedly in the investigators' interviews, they went to his house and spoke to him. AJ Ritchie was a corrections officer at Federal Correctional Institute Englewood in Denver. He and Devan had known each other for 12 or 13 years, and the status of their relationship was a big question. Were they dating like Devan had stated, and had she spent the 2 hours her postal scanner was inactive at his house? When they got to his house, they learned that he lived there with his children and his wife, not his ex-wife. They were still married and his wife was pregnant. As far as his wife Elise believed, AJ and Devan were just friends, and Devan wanted to be in a relationship with him, but of course her husband was saying no.
How do you know her? You said you've known her for about 13 years?
Yeah, so we've been friends for 13 years.
Okay.
I mean, over the last year or so, it hasn't been a very good friendship.
Okay.
But that's how I know her.
Okay. So what do you mean it hasn't been a good friendship over the last year?
She definitely made it pretty clear that she liked me more than I liked her.
Okay.
And I'm married, so
okay.
We kind of separated a bit. We still talk.
Okay.
We talked today. I have a pretty good idea what this is about because.
When did you talk to her?
Apparently while she was driving to the police station.
So this afternoon?
Yeah.
Did you talk to her any other time today?
No.
Okay. Were you home today or were you working or?
I was home.
Okay. Did she stop by here?
She delivers mail out here.
Okay. So she delivers mail to your house?
Yes.
Do you know about what time she delivered the mail?
I don't know. She usually delivers noon, 1 o'clock, I think.
Noon or 1?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what she drives when she's delivering mail? Is it a mail truck?
Yeah.
It's a mail truck?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
a normal box mail truck.
Okay. Now, when she delivered mail today, did you talk to her at all?
No.
Okay. So you didn't see her at all today until she called.
Right.
Right. Okay. But she didn't stop by and talk to you or any time before she was driving to the police station?
Well, we talked briefly today. It wasn't a good conversation. I told her that I wasn't happy that she comes by and she wants to talk. We fought a little bit. I told her I didn't want her here.
Okay. So she was here? Or that was on the...
Here.
She was here. What time was she here?
My wife and her don't get along, so...
Okay.
11 something to probably about 12:15. 12.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I left and went to get food.
Okay, so she was here from 11 to 12:15.
Yeah, something like that.
And then, so while she was here, what did you guys talk about?
She wants a relationship with me.
Okay.
I don't want a relationship with her.
Okay.
So.
Most of that was a lie. Based on the letters he wrote to Devan as well as her son, he was in love with Devan and he wrote things to her son that made it seem like he was going to be a father figure in his life. He wrote about taking the boy to see his sister in Mama's belly, and he's referring to the child his wife is pregnant with. It's truly awful. It seemed as though AJ was living a double life. One as a husband and father with another baby on the way, and the other as Devan's boyfriend and the stepfather to her son. And Devan was well aware of it. During that interview, he told detectives that he had been home all morning, and after he got in a fight with Devan, he left at about 12:15 and met some friends at Hooters. When they got surveillance footage from the restaurant, he was seen sitting at a table with a few other guys at about 12:30, so he couldn't have been the shooter. Still, investigators weren't convinced he wasn't involved. That's when they pulled the cell phone records for both Devan and AJ. Those would end up completely contradicting AJ's story. The GPS activity showed that they were both at Devan's apartment first thing in the morning. They traveled together to the Loveland post office where their GPS activity split. Devan was at the post office for a while and then she clearly began her postal route. AJ, on the other hand, drove directly to Longmont and started driving around the area of Jason's postal route. When they overlaid his route with AJ's GPS activity, they were a perfect match. AJ had been following Jason on his route. Devan's cell phone remained stationary at AJ's house starting at about 11 a.m., but AJ wasn't there. He was in Longmont, so she couldn't have been having lunch with him. Then at noon, AJ's GPS showed him rush to Loveland and arrive at Hooters where he's seen on camera. When investigators went back to the neighborhood cameras near the crime scene, they found the shots that picked up Jason's mail truck, and they saw a black SUV with a rideshare logo on it following him. Then they got information from AJ's employer that they had a contract with that rideshare service for their employees, and AJ was actually the coordinator of the prison's rideshare program. How convenient. Investigators returned to AJ's house and asked if they could take his phone, and he agreed. They didn't ask him any questions about his whereabouts that morning, and they didn't mention his GPS activity. He was on his phone. They found text messages between Devan and AJ that showed they were clearly more than friends. They included statements like "I love you" and "You're my entire world." Then they found 2 photos on the device that would be even more incriminating to Devan than her car being in the area. The first was a selfie of a person wearing the exact same disguise that the shooter had been recorded wearing. The next one, taken a few minutes later in the same place with the same phone, was Devan. Those selfies had been taken on October 11th, 2 days before the murder. Investigators recreated the footage of the shooter running away with a female officer who was 5 foot 5 inches or 165 centimeters, the same height as Devan. When they compared the height to the Postal truck she was running from, it was an exact match. It was clear that Devan had been the one who had shot Jason. She was under arrest, but they knew she had not acted alone. AJ had followed Jason that morning, and he had a picture of her in her disguise on his phone. The murder had clearly been pre-planned, and AJ had full knowledge of it. When investigators looked further back at their text messages, they found a number of them that directly mentioned killing both Jason and Rosa. One read, quote, "He's horrible. He will get what's coming to him." In another text, AJ suggested, quote, "You could just kill them both." In one message, AJ wrote, quote, "Thought we were talking about ending Rosa and Jason." Those messages started in July, 3 months before Jason had requested a modification to their parenting agreement. That is why the primary motive for the murder is believed to be jealousy over Jason and Rosa's relationship. The email about a court date to modify the parenting agreement was likely the final push to get an already existing plan into action. As if the evidence against the two wasn't enough, investigators found that they had been on the phone with each other for almost 2 hours and 45 minutes while AJ was following Jason. He was actively keeping her informed about exactly where Jason was that morning. Then they found that he had searched for information about postal scanners online. That was clearly an attempt to use the device as an alibi for the time Devan had gone up to Longmont to kill Jason. On October 19th, a police detective and a postal inspector went to the prison where AJ worked and interviewed him. Right off the bat, AJ admitted that he was actually in a romantic relationship with Devan. He said he confessed to the affair with his wife the day after the murder, and they were currently sleeping in separate areas of the house. He would eventually tell the investigator that this wasn't his first affair, but it was the first time he was caught. So, a real winner. They showed him the pictures of Devan's car in the area along with the times, which were the same times that AJ had claimed she was with him at his house.
She was not with me. She wasn't with me before that. She came over to my house after I was done with Hooters for about 10 minutes.
For about 10 minutes? Yeah. What happened when she got there?
She just stopped, used the bathroom, got some water.
Did she leave anything?
No.
Nothing at all?
No, not unless it was in the bathroom.
Did she change clothes?
No, she was...
Do you remember what she was wearing?
Not specifically. I think I told you that night. It was a pair of pants and a t-shirt.
Okay.
I think the pants were dark brown, but the t-shirt was...
Okay.
AJ's story then was that he had stayed the night at Devan's house, having told his wife that he was working a night shift. He said they left her apartment between 7:30 and 8. Devan went to work and he went home. Conveniently, his wife had already left the house with the kids, so she wouldn't be able to confirm if that was true. Then he spent the morning driving around talking to her on the phone. He wouldn't tell the investigators where he was driving, but he said he drove around until he headed to Hooters. After Hooters, he went home and Devan stopped by after to use the bathroom, then continued on her route.
Did you drop her off at work? You did that morning? Okay, so you dropped her off at the... Okay, I figured you said you didn't want to answer questions about where you went that day, so that's why I'm just asking if you dropped her off at work. Okay, so on the morning of the 13th, you dropped her off at the post office. Okay. Did she ever bring her car over to your house after that?
Her car was parked by it was right up the road from my house. So
her car was... Okay. Her car is parked up the road from your house. You had taken her to work. Okay. So did you have to pick her back up from work afterwards so she could get her car?
Yes.
Okay. I'm asking just because obviously she would need to figure out a way to get back home after that. Does that make sense?
So he's basically filling in a huge blank for the investigators. How did Devan get from his house to Longmont and back? And it's because her car was parked near his house. So not only was her car recorded in the area of the murder at the time of the murder, her postal scanner was inactive for the time around the shooting at AJ's house where she had access to her car. You couldn't lay out how the crime happened any better. Of course, AJ was still trying to make himself seem uninvolved, but that didn't last long.
Did you take her to work in your truck?
I took her to work I took her to work in my transit.
In your what's that?
We get cars from work.
Okay. Do you know what kind of car it was or anything?
It's a Durango.
Dodge Durango? Okay.
I saw it on the way in. They had like that
the way
to something logo on the side. One of those things. Okay. How do those work into the facility? Like how do you get one of those?
You have to be part of the Vanpil program, and then loan them out to us, and we drive them, and then the bureau pays money to basically subsidize it.
Okay. So you're when you were driving around, were you talking on the phone? Were you in a truck or were you in Durango?
The Durango.
Okay.
And then my truck. I switched my truck later on in the day.
To get your kids and stuff?
Yeah. And also I switch it with another guy. He drives it then after that.
Okay. And then when you dropped her off, you said you dropped her off at the post office?
Yeah, the post office.
That was in the Durango as well?
Right.
Okay.
Do you have any idea what that picture is right there?
Looks like GPS.
So those are phone signals coming from your phone down in the Longmont area in the same neighborhood as the shooting with location information for the mailman who was shot that morning. Alright? So we know that you were in Longmont that morning, and I'm not asking that because of you. I'm just asking that to further verify whether or not you had any idea where Devan was at that time. You've already told me that you weren't with Devan at 12:15 like you had previously told us. Alright? So the reason I'm showing you this is because we can show that you weren't with Devan, and you can't obviously verify where she was.
Right. What else did you want to show me?
You got nothing to say about this? That's off your phone. 2 days before this happened. Can you explain that? You're a smart guy. I think you know where we're going with this.
Yeah,
so if you want to give us answers, now's the time to give them to us.
So this is his explanation now.
This morning she told me that she was going to do it. She told me that she had already had everything that she needed to make it happen. I tried to talk her out of it. Then she went to work and told me that there was no talking her out of it. So after talking to her, and she's mentioned it in the past, and she has talked about his route because she knows the Longmont routes. So I went out there. I knew his route number.
found him, and I continued to stay on the phone with her to try to tell her, to try to talk her out of it. But I thought that she was going to go there a lot earlier than that. I thought that if I would see her, I could stop her. She kept talking to me and never showed up there. I guess she was casing at the time. So eventually she told me, you know what, don't worry about it. I'm not going to do it. It's fine. I'm going to go back to work. And she hung up the phone with me. At that point in time, I stopped over at his truck and I told him that he should watch out for her because I think she's planning on doing something. I don't think he remembered who I was because he said, what? He just looked at me and goes, what? And I was like, Devin, I said, she's unstable right now and I think that she's going to do something stupid. And he said, I'm not scared of that bitch. And I said, okay. And I left. And at that time, I drove home.
That conversation never happened. He said he talked to Jason right before noon. Then he swapped out the rideshare with an employee who also used it and went to Hooters in his truck. He told the investigators that the picture of her in the disguise was when she first told him she was going to kill Jason, and he attempted to talk her out of it then. The detective asked him why there were no text messages from him, even suggesting she shouldn't do anything to hurt Jason, and AJ said it's because she only ever mentioned killing him in person. He claimed it never came up in texts, which investigators know is a lie. They have the texts. AJ was adamant that he was not okay with her killing Jason, and he tried to talk her out of it, yet his texts that say, quote, "You could just kill them both," says otherwise. And then he lied through his teeth about where Devan was on the day of the shooting when he was first questioned. He absolutely knew exactly what Devan was going to do. He had texted her about it months prior. He knew she had a disguise and he helped her commit the crime. The investigators asked him where Devan got the gun she used, and he claimed he didn't know. The gun used in the murder was never found, and it's believed that he had supplied her with the weapon, but that's never been proven. What investigators believed happened was that Devan parked her car near AJ's house on the evening of October 12, 2021. AJ told his wife he had a night shift at the prison and he drove to Devan's apartment where they spent the night. That was all pre-planning for the murder, which AJ would have known about. He was using the rideshare vehicle during that time, and the following morning, he dropped Devan off at work and headed down to Longmont to tail Jason. AJ was able to keep an eye on exactly where Jason was while Devan worked her mail route in the morning, building her alibi. At about 11 a.m., Devan stopped at AJ's house, left her phone in the mail truck, changed into the disguise, and took her car to Longmont. That's when AJ left Longmont, swapped out the rideshare vehicle, and drove his truck to Hooters, being caught on camera to give himself an alibi. Devan parked a few blocks from where Jason was and walked to the cluster mailbox where she waited for him to arrive. When Jason was alone, she shot him, ran to her car, and drove back to AJ's house. She removed her disguise, got back in the mail truck, and finished her route. When she was done working, AJ picked her up from the Loveland post office and dropped her off at her car. Devan likely believed she would be notified about Jason's death, pick up her son, and live happily ever after, but she was immediately a suspect and she would never see her son again. It seemed that AJ thought he might be questioned, having been her alibi, but then he would be free and clear, which is why he took his phone with him while he tailed Jason. 7 days after the murder, Devan was on a recorded video call from jail talking to a previous boyfriend named Joseph Castaneda. He was the ex-boyfriend that Rosa had slept with, which got her kicked out of her apartment. It sounds like they're back together as there's a lot of I love yous, but Joseph is the one who informs her of AJ's arrest.
There's more news today.
What happened?
AJ is telling them everything, as well as they found a picture of you in the outfit.
What did he say?
That he tried to talk you down, and this had been going on for a while, and he tried to warn Jason.
What else?
Well, besides the picture of you in the same outfit that happened that day, he's also stating that you said today's the day and you have everything you need on the day when he dropped you off to work.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Did he do like a news article on it or what?
He got arrested.
Well, no, I know that, but...
And that's what he told the police.
Huh. Interesting.
He's being held for complicity.
I don't know what Devan does to win the loyalty of these men. Is it just the possibility of sex? Because she doesn't seem to have a personality that would make her desirable to most guys I know. Even ignoring anything said about her in Jason's journals and basing her personality on just her police interview, she's got to be one of the most entitled, selfish, annoying people I've ever experienced. It's clear after watching the entire call that Devan is just using Joseph to try to keep custody of Jason's son away from his parents. It's just another level of what an absolute garbage person Devan is. Despite all of the evidence against her, Devan pleaded not guilty and went to trial. Her defense was that there was no evidence that proved she had committed the murder. It didn't matter though, the jury couldn't accept all of the coincidences. Her car, her absence from the mail route, her picture wearing the exact same clothing as the person running from the scene, the text messages ahead of time threatening to kill Jason, and AJ's story were not a coincidence. Devan was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will spend the rest of her life in prison. AJ also pleaded not guilty, but didn't fare any better at trial. He was found guilty of the same crime and also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before we finish this episode, I just want to remind you that we're trying to hit 1 million subscribers this year, so before you go, take a minute to subscribe to the channel. Even better, tell someone else about the channel so they can subscribe as well. Then make sure you both turn on notifications so you'll always know when a new episode airs. You can also support the channel by checking out our merch at thisismonsters.com. A link is in the description. Your support is appreciated. The identity of Jason's son has been redacted from all files, and even if it were available somewhere, maybe on the internet, or say the Longmont Police Department missed his name a few times when they redacted the files. Oops. I don't feel comfortable giving his name here. The lack of information about him has also made it hard to find out who got custody of him. I also received a recorded interview the police conducted with Jason's mother and stepfather a few days after his murder, when they flew in from Connecticut, and I also don't feel comfortable including any of that footage. But they did mention that Rosa was filling out paperwork to get custody of Jason's son. They said they were also going to file for custody. They agree that Rosa loved him, but she was only 19 and they didn't think she would be able to afford to raise a child. Based on the video call Devan had with Joseph, it sounds like he was getting himself into a position to fight them for custody. I don't know who eventually won or where the boy ended up. Personally, I think that when one parent murders the other parent and ends up in prison, the family of the murdered parent should have first priority to custody over the child. I mean, the child could go to the perpetrator's family, but at the end of the day, they raised a murderer. So, what are your thoughts on child custody when one parent murders the other? Leave your thoughts in the comments. At the end of the day, Devan thought she was going to get her son's father out of her life and have the boy all to herself, when in the end, she just removed herself from his life as well. Then AJ made his own children fatherless by helping a woman he was having an affair with murder her ex. These are adults who believed that executing someone was the best solution to their problem. And they weren't even right about the problem. Jason wasn't filing for full custody. Fortunately, they weren't smart enough to carry out the crime without leaving evidence all over the place, and now they're locked up for the rest of their lives. Which is where they should be, because their ability to just kill someone over petty disagreements makes them complete monsters. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.